Hi guys, tonight we begin a calm journey into the life of Confucius, the teacher who defined harmony. His name echoes through centuries, shaping not only China but also the moral and philosophical foundations of many cultures. This is the story of a man born in obscurity, who rose to become one of the most enduring voices of wisdom. As we move slowly through his world, we'll discover how simple ideas about respect, order, and kindness became the guiding principles for millions. But before we begin, for those who enjoy slow, thoughtful stories about legendary figures, hit like, subscribe, and share in the comments which personality or historical figure you'd like me to cover next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always curious to see the different places my viewers are from. Confucius was born in the year 551 BCE in the small state of Lu, a corner of ancient China surrounded by shifting powers and constant rivalries. The world into which he entered was unstable, defined by the struggles of feudal lords who competed for dominance. It was an age known later as the Spring and Autumn period, a time of both intellectual awakening and political turmoil. His family was of noble descent but had fallen into poverty by the time of his birth. His father died when he was very young, leaving his mother to raise him with limited means. Despite their hardships, she instilled in him the values of perseverance, humility, and learning. From an early age, he showed a hunger for knowledge that could not be easily satisfied. In villages and markets, he would ask questions about rituals, music, and traditions. He wanted to understand why people behaved as they did, why society seemed fractured, and how harmony could be restored. For Confucius, the answers did not come from wealth or power, but from wisdom preserved in history. He immersed himself in the ancient classics of China, the poetry, songs, and rites passed down from earlier dynasties. These texts gave him not only a sense of continuity, but also a vision of order, an ideal world where rulers governed with virtue and people lived in respect for each other. As a young man, Confucius worked in modest positions, sometimes as a bookkeeper or caretaker of animals. These experiences did not diminish him. Rather, they gave him an understanding of the lives of ordinary people. He watched how labourers struggled, how families respected ancestors, and how communities maintained traditions even amid hardship. Such observations shaped his belief that society could function well if guided by moral principles rather than sheer force. Confucius also grew fascinated by ritual, not as empty ceremony, but as a way to create meaning and stability. In his eyes, rituals were threads binding individuals to community, past to present, and humanity to the divine. They reminded people of their place within something greater. He believed that when rituals were observed with sincerity, they nurtured respect and harmony. In his 20s, Confucius began teaching. At first, only a few students came, drawn by his curiosity and discipline. He did not belong to a powerful school or wealthy institution. His teaching was personal and accessible. He encouraged questions, listened attentively, and believed education should be open to anyone with the will to learn. In a time when knowledge was often reserved for elites, this was a radical idea. Over the years, more students gathered around him. They saw in him not just a teacher of facts, but a guide to living rightly. He emphasized virtues like filial piety, respect for parents and elders, as the foundation of society. If families were stable, he argued, the state itself would be stable. He also stressed benevolence, the ability to empathize with others and act with kindness. To Confucius, greatness lay not in conquest, but in the ability to treat others with humanity. Yet his early life was not without challenges. He sought positions in government where he could apply his ideas, believing that moral rulers could transform society. But often his advice was ignored or misunderstood. Political leaders were more interested in warfare and power than in cultivating virtue. Still, Confucius did not despair. He continued to teach, convinced that even if rulers would not listen, generations of students might carry his vision forward. His presence was calm, his words deliberate, and his patience remarkable. He walked the line between dreamer and realist, always seeking ways to align human life with harmony. In this first chapter of his life, we see a man shaped by loss, poverty, and struggle, but also by determination and faith in the power of wisdom. His journey had only begun, yet already the seeds of his philosophy had taken root. Those seeds, nourished by years of study and reflection, would one day blossom into one of the most influential teachings the world has ever known. After those early years of study and modest work, Confucius began to realize that knowledge alone was not enough. It had to be shared and lived. He felt an inner calling to guide others, not by force, but through teaching. In his view, wisdom was not something to be hoarded, but a gift that could multiply when passed along. His students were often young men from different backgrounds, some sons of merchants, others from families with small influence. What united them was their desire to learn from someone who valued sincerity over status. In the quiet courtyards where he taught, Confucius spoke of respect, duty, and balance. His lessons did not consist of abstract puzzles, but of practical guidance for daily life. He would ask his pupils, "How do you treat your parents, your neighbours, or those weaker than you?" By grounding philosophy in everyday choices, he made it tangible. One of his strongest beliefs was that virtue begins at home. If a person cannot honour his family, he cannot serve the state well. This principle of filial piety became the cornerstone of his thought. He told his students that harmony in the household echoed outward, rippling into villages, cities, and nations. For him, the health of society depended on the bonds of love and duty within families. At the same time, he was deeply concerned with the role of rulers. He dreamed of leaders who governed by moral example rather than threats. If a ruler behaved with fairness and kindness, his people would naturally follow. Confucius compared this to the wind and the grass. When the wind blows, the grass bends. In other words, when virtue leads, people align themselves without resistance. Despite his growing influence as a teacher, Confucius longed to see these principles applied in real governance. He took on small advisory roles, hoping that even minor positions could allow him to demonstrate the power of virtue. In some cases, his advice brought short-term improvements. Disputes settled more peacefully, communities organized more justly, yet larger lords still dismissed his vision, consumed by warfare. This frustration pushed him to continue teaching all the more passionately. His students recorded his words, turning moments of conversation into enduring lessons. Over time, these sayings would become known as the Analects, one of the most treasured works in Chinese thought. At this stage of his life, however, they were not yet a book, just fragments of guidance passed from teacher to pupil. His reputation slowly spread, carried by students who admired not only his intellect but his consistency. He lived modestly, avoided arrogance, and tried to embody the very values he taught. This authenticity made him a rare figure in an age of ambition and conflict. Confucius himself did not claim to be inventing something new. Instead, he described himself as a transmitter of wisdom, preserving and clarifying the ancient ways. In doing so, he connected the troubled present with the noble ideals of the past. His journey was still unfolding, and the path ahead remained uncertain, but already the figure of Confucius stood out as a light in unsettled times. Confucius often reflected on the world he lived in, a world where ancient traditions were fading and violence shaped the destiny of states. The spring and autumn period was filled with uncertainty. Rival kingdoms fought for territory, and ordinary people suffered under the weight of endless conflicts. For Confucius, this turmoil was more than political. It revealed the loss of moral direction. He believed that society had drifted away from the values that once gave it balance. His response was not despair, but determination. He thought that if enough people rediscovered virtue, even in small circles, harmony could gradually return. His teachings were like ripples spreading across a pond, beginning in the classroom but reaching outward toward the wider world. He told his students that every act mattered, even the smallest gestures of respect. A bow offered sincerely, a word spoken kindly, or a promise kept faithfully. These, to him, were not trivial but essential steps toward harmony. He often warned that neglecting such duties was the root of disorder, because when individuals forgot respect, entire families and states unravelled. Rituals remained a constant theme in his philosophy. He explained that rituals preserved dignity in human life, turning daily interactions into opportunities for respect. But he was careful to add that rituals without sincerity were empty shells. True ritual required both form and heart, reminding participants of their shared humanity. In this way, he sought to transform customs into living practices that shaped character. Music also played an important role in his thinking. For Confucius, music had the power to soothe emotions and unify communities. He believed that when music was refined and harmonious, it guided people toward virtue. A society's music, he suggested, revealed its moral condition. Gentle tones signalled order, while chaotic sounds hinted at disorder. By teaching music alongside ritual, he emphasized balance between inner feeling and outer conduct. As he grew older, Confucius became more convinced that education was the true foundation of reform. Unlike many in his era, he believed learning should not be limited by birth or wealth. Talent and character, not family name, were the measures of a student's worth. This belief drew many young men to him, eager to rise beyond their circumstances. In quiet gatherings he told them that knowledge was a path to self-cultivation, and self-cultivation was the path to serving others. His message was simple yet profound. Before ruling others, one must first learn to rule oneself. Self-control, honesty, and compassion were the true marks of strength. Students who followed him often remarked that his lessons were as much about watching his example as hearing his words. He ate plainly, lived modestly, and showed courtesy to all, regardless of status. To them, he embodied the harmony he described, making his philosophy not just a theory but a way of life. Confucius understood that he was a small voice in a noisy world, but he trusted that truth, once spoken, had a way of enduring. As Confucius advanced in years, his reputation slowly expanded beyond his home state of Lu. Word of a thoughtful teacher who emphasized harmony, respect, and virtue reached neighboring regions. Some officials invited him to share his views, curious about whether his principles could stabilize their courts. Confucius always approached these invitations with hope, believing that even small chances could allow his philosophy to influence governance. He was not naive. He knew that many rulers cared more about power than virtue, but he still believed moral example was stronger than force. He explained that a ruler who cultivated goodness in his own heart would inspire trust without needing weapons. To illustrate this, he often used metaphors drawn from nature. Just as the North Star remains fixed while other stars revolve around it, a virtuous ruler could anchor society by his constancy. Despite such wisdom, political life rarely welcomed him warmly. His straightforward honesty sometimes clashed with the ambitions of lords. While he wished to serve, he would not compromise his principles for convenience. This tension left him moving between opportunities, never finding a permanent place to apply his vision. Yet this wandering period became fruitful in another way. It allowed him to encounter diverse people and situations, each of which deepened his reflections. In villages, he observed how commoners resolved disputes without official guidance, often relying on custom and trust. These observations strengthened his conviction that harmony must begin at the level of ordinary lives, not only at the top of government. If people were guided by mutual respect, even turbulent times could be endured with dignity. Confucius also used these travels to teach wherever he went. His students followed him loyally, walking long distances across fields and rivers. They carried with them not only his words, but the discipline of living them. Each student represented a seed planted in uncertain soil, carrying the potential for future generations to inherit the spirit of harmony. During these journeys, Confucius deepened his reflections on the role of history. He urged his students to study the past, not as a relic, but as a guide. Ancient texts, he said, contained models of virtue that could be adapted to new circumstances. For him, learning was never passive. It was an active dialogue between old wisdom and present need. This balance of respect for tradition and concern for the present made his teaching both timeless and practical. Though he often met disappointment in courts, Confucius did not grow bitter. Instead, he held fast to his belief that moral truth was patient. A single lifetime might not be enough to see transformation, but planting the vision was itself a worthy task. As he moved through the landscapes of ancient China, his figure became that of a gentle traveller, part philosopher, part teacher, always carrying with him the quiet hope that harmony could one day prevail. The bond between Confucius and his disciples grew stronger as the years passed. They were not merely students, but companions on a shared journey, and their loyalty reflected the trust he had earned through consistency. These young men often recorded his sayings, not because he demanded it, but because they sensed the weight of his wisdom. They knew that his words could guide them long after his voice was gone. Many of these notes would later form the foundation of the Analects, a collection that preserved his spirit for centuries. Confucius never treated teaching as a one-sided lecture. He welcomed questions, debates, and even disagreement, believing that truth became clearer through dialogue. He encouraged his students to think independently, reminding them that memorization without understanding was useless. Learning, he said, must transform character, not just fill the mind. His conversations often revolved around virtue, but he always linked virtue to action. For example, he explained that benevolence meant more than kind feelings. It required tangible acts of care. A leader might speak of love for his people, but unless he provided justice and stability, his words were empty. Such clarity made his philosophy practical, rooted in everyday realities. During this period, Confucius also reflected deeply on justice. He argued that laws and punishments alone could never create true order. Fear might control behavior for a time, but it could not shape the heart. Only through virtue could people learn to choose rightly even when no one was watching. This belief marked a crucial difference between Confucian thought and the harsher doctrines that would later arise. His focus was always on inner cultivation rather than external coercion. Confucius also emphasized humility in leadership. He often told his students that a ruler must be the first to practice what he preached. Authority without example was hollow, like a drum without sound. True respect, he said, was earned through consistency of character, not inherited through titles. His students found in him a living example of this principle. He lived modestly, dressed simply, and accepted hardships without complaint. To them, his life embodied the harmony he taught. Yet Confucius was realistic about human weakness. He acknowledged that no one could be perfect, including himself. What mattered was the constant effort to improve, to align one's actions a little closer to virtue each day. This patient view of growth gave his teaching a gentle but enduring quality. It reassured students that even small steps mattered. By walking steadily on the path of self-cultivation, they contributed to the greater harmony of the world. As Confucius matured, his longing to see his philosophy applied in governance deepened. He envisioned a society where rulers embodied virtue and citizens found stability through moral guidance. This dream was not abstract. It was rooted in the suffering he saw daily, from farmers burdened by taxes to soldiers lost in endless wars. He hoped that wise leadership could ease these hardships, replacing fear with trust. Eventually, Confucius accepted small posts in the administration of a lu. He served as an overseer of granaries and later as a supervisor of public fields. Though humble, these positions allowed him to apply his principles in practical ways. He was diligent, honest, and fair, ensuring that resources were distributed properly and that corruption was resisted. Even in these limited roles, he gained a reputation for competence and integrity. His sense of justice was not rigid but humane. He believed that officials should act like guardians rather than masters, guiding the people with care. Such conduct won him respect from those who served under him, though it sometimes aroused suspicion among higher lords who feared his influence. For Confucius, however, titles mattered less than the chance to embody virtue. He often told his students that service was meaningful only when guided by principle, not ambition. His time in government also gave him insights into the weaknesses of power. He saw how rival families manipulated rulers, how bribery corroded decisions, and how wars were launched for pride rather than necessity. These observations confirmed his belief that without moral foundations, authority would collapse. He compared it to a house built on sand. No matter how grand, it could not stand. Yet he did not allow disillusionment to harden his spirit. Instead, he used these experiences to refine his teaching. He warned his students that leadership demanded vigilance, for even small lapses in virtue could create disorder. His stories of court life became lessons, illustrating both the dangers of corruption and the possibility of just rule. During this period, Confucius also expanded his reflections on education. He argued that rulers themselves must be lifelong learners, open to correction and wisdom. A king unwilling to learn, he said, was like a sealed vessel. Nothing could enter, and nothing good could emerge. This insistence on humility in the powerful was radical in a world where rulers often demanded blind obedience. Though his government career remained brief and uneven, it gave him credibility. He had not spoken from theory alone, but from lived experience. To his followers, this blend of practice and principle made him all the more authentic, a teacher who walked among the realities of his age. Confucius's service in Lu eventually drew him into higher responsibilities, and for a short time he held the office of Minister of Justice. In this role he sought to demonstrate that fairness could guide society more effectively than fear. He oversaw cases with calm patience, listening carefully before deciding. His judgments were noted for their balance, firm when necessary, but always aimed at restoring harmony rather than punishing harshly. Under his guidance, crime reportedly declined, and people felt a rare sense of order. Yet this success was fragile. Powerful clans within Lu viewed his influence with suspicion, fearing that his reforms might limit their own control. Political intrigue soon undermined his position, and he was forced to step aside. Confucius accepted this setback with dignity. He reminded his disciples that virtue was measured not by success, but by perseverance. Even if rulers rejected his counsel, the truth remained unchanged. His philosophy, he believed, would outlast the turbulence of politics. After leaving office, Confucius began a long period of wandering with his disciples. They travelled across different states, sometimes welcomed, sometimes rejected. These journeys were difficult. At times they faced hunger, hostility, and uncertainty. But they also brought encounters with diverse customs and rulers, enriching Confucius's understanding of human nature. He used every situation, whether pleasant or harsh, as a teaching moment. When denied food, he spoke of resilience. When offered hospitality, he emphasized gratitude. His students admired this steady composure, seeing in him a living example of endurance. On the road, Confucius also refined his vision of the ideal state. He described it as a place where leaders acted like fathers to their people, ruling with benevolence rather than force. He often contrasted two types of authority, that of the tyrant, who demanded obedience through fear, and that of the sage, who inspired loyalty through virtue. To him, only the latter could build lasting stability. These lessons, carried across landscapes and seasons, left a deep mark on his disciples. Though weary from travel, they remained devoted, convinced that his message was worth spreading. In their eyes, every hardship endured alongside their teacher was part of a greater mission. Confucius, for his part, never stopped believing that one day a ruler might truly embrace his philosophy. He told his students that patience was essential, for change rooted in virtue grew slowly like a tree, but its branches would one day shelter generations. Thus his wanderings, though outwardly filled with struggle, became inwardly a journey of growth, both for himself and for those who followed him. The years of wandering tested Confucius and his disciples in many ways. Travelling from court to court, they often found themselves met with polite interest but little action. Some rulers listened with respect, yet quickly returned to their pursuit of wars and alliances. Others dismissed him outright, considering virtue too weak a tool for governing turbulent times. Confucius bore these disappointments quietly, teaching his followers that patience was stronger than frustration. He compared their mission to planting seeds in rocky soil. Even if growth seemed impossible, one never knew where roots might take hold. During these journeys, his teachings grew more nuanced. He began to stress the importance of balance between firmness and kindness. A leader, he explained, must combine strength with compassion, like a skilled musician blending tones into harmony. Too much harshness bred fear, while too much softness invited disorder. Only the right balance could inspire true loyalty. These ideas resonated deeply with his students, who saw in them guidance not only for rulers but for personal conduct. Confucius often used their travels as living examples. When faced with hunger after being denied supplies, he spoke about endurance and the dignity of maintaining courtesy even in hardship. When they were treated with generosity, he reminded them that gratitude was as vital as resilience. Every circumstance became a lesson in applying virtue to real life. Though weary, his disciples treasured these experiences, convinced they were shaping their own character under his guidance. Confucius also reflected more deeply on the role of education during this period. He told his students that true learning was not about amassing information, but about transformation of the self. He urged them to study not just books, but people, events, and their own responses to adversity. Knowledge, he said, must enter the heart, not merely the memory. He believed that through such education, individuals could achieve harmony within themselves, which would then extend outward to their families and communities. Music and ritual remained central in his thought. In quiet evenings, when his followers gathered around a fire, he sometimes recited ancient songs, explaining how rhythm and order in music reflected the balance of the cosmos. To him, music was more than art. It was a mirror of virtue. A society with gentle music was likely at peace. A society with chaotic sounds often mirrored disorder. These reflections reminded his disciples that harmony was not an abstraction, but something that could be felt and practiced. Despite years without official recognition, Confucius maintained calm faith. He told his students that history's judgment moved slowly but surely. Virtue might be ignored in one age only to become the foundation of the next. What mattered was that they continued to walk the path with sincerity. His words carried a quiet strength that sustained them through hunger, rejection, and fatigue. Thus, the wandering years, though filled with outward trials, became a crucible where both master and disciples forged resilience and deepened their shared vision of harmony. Among the many lessons Confucius offered during his years of travel, one that stood out most clearly was his insistence on the importance of self-cultivation. He explained to his disciples that a person who wished to bring order to the world must first bring order to himself. To him, personal virtue was the root from which all harmony grew. If a man learned to control his desires, speak truthfully, and act with kindness, then his household would prosper. From that household, the ripple of virtue could spread outward to the community, and from there to the state itself. He often used the metaphor of polishing jade. Just as a raw stone became beautiful through patient refinement, so too did the human heart achieve nobility through constant effort. These reflections gave his followers hope that even if they could not transform kingdoms, they could at least transform themselves. Confucius also stressed the value of honesty in both speech and action. He warned that eloquence without sincerity was dangerous, for it could deceive others and corrode trust. In his view, the true gentleman was not the one who spoke most cleverly, but the one whose words aligned with his deeds. This integrity, he taught, was the foundation of lasting respect. The disciples saw in him a living model of this principle, for his life was marked by simplicity and consistency. He never asked of others what he was unwilling to practice himself. Even in hardship, he remained courteous, showing that dignity was not dependent on wealth or position, but on the strength of character. Another central theme during this time was moderation. Confucius reminded his companions that extremes, whether of indulgence or severity, led to imbalance. He praised the middle path, where discipline and compassion met. In governance, this meant neither ruling with cruelty nor allowing chaos through negligence. In personal life, it meant enjoying food, music, and companionship without excess or neglect. This balanced approach, he said, reflected the natural rhythms of heaven and earth, which always sought harmony. The disciples carried these lessons with them, repeating them to each other as encouragement during long marches. They knew their teacher's journey was not only across landscapes, but also into the depths of wisdom, and they felt privileged to share in it. Confucius, for his part, found comfort in their loyalty. He once told them that while rulers might ignore his counsel, he had already succeeded in shaping lives that would carry his message forward. Thus, even in rejection, he discovered a quiet form of victory, one built not on conquest or recognition, but on the steady cultivation of virtue in those who walked beside him. Confucius's journeys eventually brought him into contact with rulers who showed genuine curiosity about his philosophy, though few were ready to adopt it fully. In some courts, he was treated with honour, seated at banquets, and asked to share his views on governance. He always spoke with calm conviction, never tailoring his message to flatter his hosts. He told them that stability could not be purchased with armies or decrees. It was earned through the ruler's own virtue. If the leader was just, the people would follow willingly. If the leader was corrupt, no amount of force could secure loyalty. His words impressed many, yet when faced with the reality of political competition, most rulers retreated to old habits of power. This pattern repeated often: initial admiration, followed by hesitation, and finally dismissal. For his disciples, such outcomes were discouraging. They wondered why their master's wisdom, so clear and humane, failed to change the minds of leaders. Confucius responded by teaching them the importance of timing. He explained that just as seasons could not be rushed, so too could virtue not be forced upon an unwilling age. Their task was to preserve the teachings until a more receptive time arrived. He urged them to remain steady, for truth endured even when ignored. During these years, Confucius also developed his ideas about the qualities of a true gentleman, or yunzi. He described the yunzi as a person who lived with integrity, placed duty above personal gain, and cultivated learning not for prestige but for moral growth. The Junzi did not seek perfection but practiced humility, knowing that self-improvement was endless. This ideal became a guiding star for his disciples, giving them a concrete model of character to strive toward. Confucius often contrasted the Junzi with the petty man, who pursued profit, neglected virtue, and shifted his principles to suit convenience. By drawing this contrast, he emphasized that greatness was measured not by wealth or status, but by steadfastness of heart. His students carried these teachings deeply, repeating them in their own reflections and writings. In the evenings, when the group camped in remote places, Confucius sometimes recited lines from ancient poetry. He explained how these verses captured timeless emotions, loyalty, sorrow, joy, and showed that even in chaos, humanity could find meaning. These quiet nights became treasured memories, where philosophy mingled with song and hardship softened into shared purpose. The disciples began to see that the journey itself was as important as the destination. Confucius reminded them that though courts might close their doors, the road always remained open for those who walked in virtue. As the years of wandering stretched on, Confucius and his followers experienced both hardship and growth. They travelled through regions where wars had left villages empty and fields untended, silent reminders of the cost of ambition. These sights deepened Confucius's conviction that only moral leadership could restore balance. He told his disciples that when rulers ignored virtue, the people became like boats adrift without a rudder, vulnerable to every wave. Yet even amid such bleakness, he remained composed, insisting that wisdom must be steady, like a mountain unmoved by storms. His calm presence gave his students courage, teaching them that dignity could be preserved even when external circumstances were harsh. Many nights were spent with little food, and sometimes they went hungry for days. But Confucius used even these moments as lessons. He reminded his followers that virtue was not tested in comfort but in adversity. To endure hardship with grace, he said, was a sign of true cultivation. He often quoted ancient songs to lift their spirits, turning despair into reflection. His ability to find meaning in difficulty left a lasting mark on those around him. During this period, Confucius also refined his views on loyalty. He explained that loyalty was not blind obedience, but a balance between duty and integrity. A minister, he argued, should serve his ruler faithfully, but if the ruler acted unjustly, true loyalty required offering honest counsel, even at personal risk. This idea challenged the fear-driven politics of his day, yet it offered a vision of responsibility rooted in conscience. His disciples admired this courage, though they also knew it limited his political opportunities. Still, Confucius believed it better to be rejected for honesty than rewarded for flattery. He often contrasted the fleeting rewards of dishonesty with the enduring peace of a clear conscience. Another theme that grew stronger was his teaching on humility. He described himself as a transmitter, not creator, of wisdom. This modesty was striking, for many philosophers sought recognition as innovators. Confucius insisted that his mission was to preserve the essence of ancient traditions, while adapting them to present needs. By honouring the past, he believed one could guide the future. His disciples came to see humility not as weakness, but as strength, for it freed the mind from vanity and opened it to learning. Through hunger, rejection, and wandering, they discovered that their teacher's greatest lesson was not found only in his words, but in his example. During their years on the road, Confucius and his followers often encountered moments that tested their resolve in unexpected ways. In one state, they were surrounded by hostile soldiers who viewed travelling scholars with suspicion. For days they were kept under watch, denied supplies, and left to wonder whether they would be allowed to leave. His disciples grew anxious, but Confucius remained calm. He told them that danger revealed character, and that the true test of wisdom was not escaping hardship, but facing it with dignity. His serenity steadied them, showing that composure could be a shield as strong as weapons. When they were finally released, his students reflected that their master's calm had been more powerful than any defense they could have mounted. Such experiences deepened their trust in his guidance. Confucius used these trials to illustrate the importance of inner stability. He reminded his disciples that external events were beyond control, but one's response to them remained a choice. A noble person, he said, maintained clarity even in chaos, just as a still pond reflected the sky despite winds above it. This imagery lingered in their minds, a reminder that peace was cultivated within. At other times they were welcomed with warmth, invited into courts where music played and rituals were performed. Confucius carefully observed these ceremonies, noting where they upheld true sincerity and where they had become hollow displays. He explained to his disciples that ritual without heart was like a lamp without flame, present in form but devoid of light. True ritual, he emphasized, connected people to one another and to their ancestors in ways that nourished respect. These lessons gave his followers insight into the delicate balance between appearance and authenticity. Music continued to hold an honored place in his teaching. On peaceful evenings, he would play or recite melodies that carried ancient wisdom. He explained how rhythm mirrored the cycles of nature and how harmony in tones reflected harmony in life. For him, music was a moral force, shaping emotions and guiding communities toward order. His disciples began to sense that their education was not only intellectual but also emotional, teaching them to feel the depth of virtue as much as to reason about it. Through every feast, famine, and trial, Confucius's message remained steady. Virtue was the path, harmony the goal, and sincerity the key that unlocked both. His disciples, though weary at times, carried this message forward with renewed determination, knowing they were part of something greater than themselves. As the years passed, Confucius became more reflective about the mission he and his disciples pursued. He often spoke of the mandate of heaven, a belief that rulers held authority only so long as they governed with virtue. To him, this idea was not merely theological but practical. A corrupt ruler eventually lost the trust of the people, and with it, his legitimacy. He reminded his followers that heaven's mandate could not be claimed through force alone. It was earned through justice and benevolence. This teaching gave his students a broader perspective, helping them see their efforts as part of a cosmic order rather than just political struggle. Confucius also taught that harmony required each person to fulfill their role with integrity. Fathers should act as fathers, rulers as rulers, and friends as friends. This emphasis on proper relationships was not about limiting freedom, but about creating stability. When roles were respected, society functioned smoothly, like a well-tuned instrument. But when roles were confused or neglected, discord arose. His disciples learned that order began not with grand reforms, but with individuals living responsibly in their own spheres. These ideas later became central to Confucian philosophy, shaping cultures for centuries. On their travels, Confucius sometimes encountered skeptics who mocked his devotion to virtue in a world dominated by force. He didn't answer with anger, but with calm reasoning. He explained that while power might win battles, only virtue could win hearts. Armies could control bodies, but they could never command loyalty without justice. His quiet confidence often silenced critics, if not convincing them fully. His disciples admired this ability to remain composed, seeing in it proof that his philosophy was not just theory, but lived conviction. He also emphasized the importance of trust as the foundation of governance. A ruler could survive without wealth, or even a large army, he said, but never without the trust of the people. Trust was the invisible bond that held society together, and once broken, no decree could restore it. This principle resonated deeply with his followers, who saw how often rulers squandered trust through greed and deception. Confucius taught them that even in small interactions, honesty built the kind of trust that could ripple outward. By embodying these values themselves, they could help prepare the ground for a more harmonious age. Through hunger, rejection, and fleeting honours, Confucius carried these insights with patience. His disciples realized that while they might not change kingdoms overnight, they were carrying seeds of wisdom that time itself would nurture. Confucius's journeys eventually led him to moments of deep discouragement. In some states, he and his followers were refused entry altogether, left to wander the countryside without shelter. At times, even common villagers hesitated to provide food, fearing association with strangers during unstable times. Yet Confucius never allowed despair to dominate his spirit. He told his disciples that virtue was like the sun. Even if clouds hid it, its light remained constant. Such words gave them strength to keep moving forward. In private conversations, some students admitted their doubts, wondering if their teacher's vision would ever find acceptance. Confucius listened patiently and reminded them that the worth of a path was not measured by immediate results, but by its alignment with truth. He compared their work to planting trees whose shade they might never enjoy, but which future generations would cherish. These reflections comforted his disciples, teaching them to see their hardships as part of a larger story unfolding beyond their lifetimes. During these trials, Confucius emphasized resilience. He explained that resilience was not simply enduring suffering, but transforming it into wisdom. Hardship, he said, was a teacher in disguise, offering lessons that comfort could never reveal. His own calm in adversity became proof of this belief. When food was scarce, he still shared what little he had. When spirits fell, he lifted them with song or recollection of ancient poetry. His ability to turn misfortune into meaning became one of his most enduring lessons. At the same time, he deepened his teaching on kindness. He urged his disciples to treat others with humanity, even when met with rejection. To repay resentment with virtue, he explained, is the highest form of strength. These words challenged the instincts of many, but they revealed his unwavering commitment to harmony. By practicing kindness in difficult times, they preserved their own dignity and planted seeds of trust that might sprout later. Confucius also spoke often of hope. He acknowledged that the world was troubled, yet he insisted that history moved in cycles. Disorder would not last forever. One day, rulers would awaken to the value of virtue. Their task was to ensure that when that moment arrived, the teachings were ready. This perspective gave his followers a sense of mission that transcended personal hardship. They began to see themselves not as wanderers without a home, but as guardians of a vision destined to outlast their struggles. In this way, their teacher transformed despair into quiet perseverance, shaping them into men whose lives would echo his message long after the roads of exile had ended. As Confucius grew older, his reflections on virtue and governance became ever more precise. He often told his disciples that harmony began with sincerity, for without sincerity even the most beautiful rituals were hollow. A man might bow deeply or offer elaborate words, but if his heart lacked truth, the act was meaningless. True virtue, he explained, flowed naturally from an honest heart, just as clear water flowed from a pure spring. His disciples absorbed this principle, learning that appearances mattered far less than intention. In their own lives, they sought to act with simplicity and authenticity, following the example of their teacher. Confucius also emphasized the importance of moderation in emotions. Anger, he warned, clouded judgment, while excessive joy could lead to carelessness. The noble person, he said, maintained balance, neither suppressing feelings nor being mastered by them. He compared the heart to a carriage. Emotions were its horses, powerful and necessary, but unless guided with skill, they could overturn the rider. This image helped his students understand the need for self-control without denying the reality of human feeling. Another theme he returned to was learning. He often reminded his followers that knowledge without reflection was shallow, while reflection without learning was dangerous. To study diligently and then meditate on lessons, he believed, created true wisdom. He urged them to read ancient texts, observe the world, and test their understanding through dialogue. This cycle of study and reflection became the rhythm of their days, shaping them into thoughtful men prepared for both public service and personal growth. Confucius also drew attention to friendship as a vital part of moral development. Good friends, he explained, encouraged virtue and corrected faults, while bad company led one astray. He told his disciples to choose companions who uplifted their character, for people grew to resemble those they spent time with. His own band of students became proof of this idea, supporting one another in hardship and modelling the values they sought to embody. Despite his age, Confucius maintained energy for teaching. His voice carried both authority and gentleness, making his lessons easy to remember. His disciples often remarked that being near him was itself a lesson, for his conduct revealed as much as his words. He was courteous to strangers, patient with students, and steadfast in adversity. By embodying what he taught, he showed that philosophy was not confined to scrolls, but lived in daily action. Through sincerity, balance, learning, and friendship, Confucius offered his followers not just theories, but a way of life that promised harmony in both private and public spheres. Confucius's journeys eventually brought him back closer to his homeland, though his position remained uncertain. By this time, he had spent many years wandering, offering counsel to rulers who often admired his wisdom but failed to act upon it. His disciples, though loyal, sometimes asked whether all their efforts had been in vain. Confucius responded with quiet conviction, reminding them that seeds of virtue often grew unseen, only to bloom long after the planter was gone. He told them that the worth of their journey could not be measured by immediate success, but by the strength of their example. Even if rulers ignored them, ordinary people might remember their kindness, and even a single life influenced toward virtue was a victory. This perspective gave his disciples patience, teaching them to look beyond the narrow horizon of their own lifetimes. During this stage of his life, Confucius began to organize his thoughts more systematically. He collected ancient poems, rites, and historical records, preserving them as teaching tools. He believed that the wisdom of the past carried guidance for the present, and he wanted to ensure it was not lost. His students helped in this task, copying texts and memorizing verses. In this way, his school became not only a circle of conversation, but also a guardian of culture. Later generations would credit him with shaping the 5 classics, foundational works of Chinese tradition. Confucius emphasized that these texts were not relics but living guides. Poetry taught empathy, history revealed patterns of virtue and failure, rites preserved respect, and music nurtured harmony. By uniting these elements, he offered his students a comprehensive vision of how life could be ordered. He told them that a cultivated person was like a well-balanced instrument, capable of producing harmony in thought, word, and deed. These lessons deepened the disciples' sense of mission, for they realized they were part of something far greater than themselves. At the same time, Confucius never abandoned his humility. He reminded them that he was not the author of these truths, but their transmitter. He described himself as one who loved the ancients and sought to revive their wisdom for a troubled world. This modesty gave credibility to his teaching, for it showed that he sought not fame but service. In evenings, when the group rested after long travel, Confucius sometimes spoke of his own doubts and sorrows. He admitted his disappointments, but always turned them into encouragement, showing that even the wise carried burdens. His openness made him human in the eyes of his disciples, binding them closer in respect and affection. As Confucius entered the later years of his life, his desire to see his teachings put into practice never faded. Yet he also grew more realistic, recognizing that his age might pass without the change he dreamed of. This awareness did not diminish his energy for teaching. Instead, it deepened his resolve to prepare his disciples for the future. He often told them that wisdom was not about immediate victories, but about endurance across generations. A single voice could echo through centuries if it carried truth. His faith in the power of ideas became a steady light, even when political hopes dimmed. In this period, Confucius also refined his concept of Ren, often translated as humanity or benevolence. He explained that Ren was the root of all virtue, the capacity to feel with others and act out of genuine care. Without Ren, rituals became hollow and laws oppressive. With Ren, even simple acts gained meaning. He urged his disciples to cultivate this quality above all, for it was the essence of harmony. To illustrate, he would point to everyday situations, helping a neighbour, honouring one's parents, or treating strangers with courtesy. Such acts, though small, revealed the depth of Ren and built trust that no ruler could command by decree. His disciples found in this teaching both simplicity and profundity, a guide they could practice in every aspect of life. Confucius also continued to stress the role of example in leadership. He argued that a ruler's character shaped the entire state. Just as a crooked tree cast a crooked shadow, a corrupt leader produced corruption in his people. By contrast, when a ruler embodied virtue, his influence spread naturally, requiring no threats. These metaphors stayed with his disciples, reminding them that leadership was first of all a moral task. At the same time, Confucius accepted that not all would follow. He taught that disappointment was part of the path, but that one must remain steadfast regardless of others' choices. The noble person, he said, stands firm even when alone. This resilience became one of his most admired qualities. In quiet moments, he sometimes confessed sadness at the world's turmoil, yet his spirit never turned bitter. He saw himself as a bridge, carrying wisdom from the ancients into an uncertain future. His disciples came to understand that their teacher's greatness lay not only in his words, but in his refusal to abandon hope. Through Ren, through example, and through patience, he gave them a model of harmony that transcended their wandering years. In his later travels, Confucius became more contemplative about the legacy he would leave behind. He often reminded his disciples that the measure of a life was not wealth, titles, or even recognition, but the influence one had on the hearts of others. To guide even a few toward virtue, he told them, is a greater achievement than to rule 1,000 without justice. These words gave his followers comfort, especially when they faced rejection in foreign courts. They realized that their mission was not wasted, for the seeds they carried could sprout quietly, unseen, until the right season arrived. During this stage, Confucius also devoted more attention to history. He taught that the past was a mirror in which rulers could see both their flaws and their potential. By studying the rise and fall of dynasties, one could understand the causes of harmony and chaos. He urged his disciples to treat history not as distant tales, but as living lessons. A ruler who ignored history, he said, was like a traveller walking at night without a lamp, stumbling blindly into dangers that others had already faced. His reverence for history deepened his students' sense of continuity, binding them to traditions that extended far beyond their own lifetimes. Music, too, continued to hold a special place in his teaching. Confucius explained that music shaped the soul in ways words could not. Harmonious tones calmed the heart and encouraged reflection, while disorderly sounds stirred restlessness. He believed that a society's character could be measured by its music just as much as by its laws. When his disciples practiced music together, he told them that they were not merely playing notes, but cultivating harmony within themselves and with one another. These evenings of song became a quiet refuge from the struggles of the road, reminding them of the beauty that virtue could create. Confucius also reflected often on mortality. He spoke of life as a journey with uncertain length, where the task was not to control the end but to walk the path with integrity. He admitted that he might never see a ruler embrace his philosophy, yet he remained content that his teachings would live on in his students. "If my words survive in you," he once said, "then harmony will one day find its place." For his disciples, this was both a burden and a blessing. They understood that they were carriers of a legacy greater than themselves. In this way, Confucius transformed uncertainty into purpose, turning each day of their wandering into part of a larger story that would stretch far beyond their own years. As Confucius aged, he began to focus more on distilling his wisdom into clear principles that his disciples could carry forward. He realized that their loyalty and devotion gave him a chance to shape the future long after his own voice was gone. He often repeated that the essence of learning was not memorization but transformation. Knowledge, he said, must reshape the heart until virtue became natural, like breathing. This belief turned his teaching into more than instruction. It became a way of life. His disciples grew to understand that philosophy was not separate from daily acts, but present in every greeting, every choice, every tone of voice. Confucius reminded them that a society built on such awareness would never need harsh laws, for respect and kindness would guide behavior. During this period, he also emphasized the importance of proper speech. He told his students that words had power to heal or to wound, to build trust or to destroy it. Careless speech, he warned, was like scattering sparks in dry grass. By contrast, truthful and respectful words created bonds that endured. He believed that language shaped thought and thought shaped action, making careful speech a cornerstone of harmony. His disciples practiced this discipline, learning to choose words slowly and with care. Confucius also returned often to the theme of leadership. He explained that rulers must be like parents, guiding with patience and care rather than domination. The bond between ruler and subject, he said, should resemble that between father and child. Firm yet compassionate, demanding yet loving. Such leadership inspired genuine loyalty rather than fear. To illustrate, he told them that when people trusted their ruler, they would follow him even into hardship. But when they distrusted him, they would scatter even in times of abundance. These lessons reveal the depth of his conviction that harmony could only emerge from moral foundations. In his later years, Confucius sometimes expressed quiet sorrow that his teachings had not been fully embraced by rulers of his time. Yet he never let regret consume him. He turned instead to gratitude, often telling his disciples that to have companions who shared his vision was itself a blessing. He explained that even if the world did not change in his lifetime, the example of their small community proved that harmony was possible. By living what they taught, they created a living model for others to follow. This realization gave strength to his disciples, who saw that their journey, though filled with hardship, had meaning that stretched beyond immediate recognition. As Confucius returned to his home state of Lu after years of wandering, he was no longer a young man filled with the same hope of immediate change. Yet his spirit was steady, and his dedication to teaching had only deepened. By now he had gathered around him a circle of disciples who would ensure that his ideas would not fade. He often remarked that while rulers had failed to accept his vision, heaven had blessed him with students who would carry the message into the future. This conviction gave him peace, for he understood that the influence of a teacher was measured not by the honours he received, but by the lives he touched. In Lu, he devoted his remaining years to organising knowledge. He guided his disciples in preserving the classics, editing ancient poems, songs, and records. These works were not simply academic. He believed they embodied the wisdom of ages and offered models of virtue. He encouraged his students to study them deeply, not to imitate blindly, but to draw lessons that could be adapted to their own time. His care in preserving these texts ensured that future generations would inherit both cultural memory and moral guidance. Confucius also continued to shape his teachings into concise sayings. His disciples recorded these conversations, collecting them as treasured reminders of his voice. These sayings later became the Analects, one of the most influential texts in world history. The disciples recognized that they were not just students, but custodians of a legacy. They knew that the world might ignore their master now, but one day his words would guide nations. During this period, Confucius also reflected more on personal cultivation. He reminded his disciples that the path of virtue never ended, even in old age. He admitted his own struggles, saying that he continued to learn and correct himself each day. This humility inspired his students, for it showed that wisdom was not a destination but a lifelong journey. He explained that the noble person always sought improvement, whether young or old, honoured or overlooked. Such persistence, he believed, was the foundation of harmony. Despite his advancing years, Confucius remained active in teaching. His voice, though gentler, still carried authority. His presence offered comfort to his disciples, who felt that simply being near him was a lesson in itself. They watched how he greeted others, how he accepted small hardships without complaint, how he treated both friend and stranger with respect. These quiet examples became as valuable as his words. In this way, Confucius closed his life not with political triumphs, but with the quiet triumph of shaping character, leaving behind a living philosophy that would endure across centuries. In the final chapter of his life, Confucius often reflected on the long journey that had carried him through courts, villages, and endless roads. Though he had never seen his philosophy fully embraced by rulers, he did not view his life as a failure. Instead, he measured success in the growth of his disciples and the preservation of wisdom for the future. He explained to them that the path of virtue was never guaranteed to bring immediate rewards, but it always left behind a light for others to follow. This realization gave him serenity, a calm acceptance that his role had been to plant seeds rather than to harvest them. He often gathered his students to review the classics, encouraging them to question, discuss, and internalize the lessons. These sessions were not rigid lectures but living conversations, filled with questions about justice, loyalty, and the nature of humanity. Confucius delighted in seeing his disciples challenge him respectfully. for he believed that truth was strengthened by dialogue. To him, the true teacher was not one who imposed answers, but one who guided the search. In these exchanges, he reminded them that they were not merely learning for themselves, but preparing to guide future generations. He urged them to remain humble, for humility opened the door to wisdom, while arrogance closed it. In his later years, Confucius also spoke candidly about sorrow. He mourned the loss of his son and grieved when favoured disciples passed away. Yet even in grief, he turned to reflection, teaching that mourning itself was an expression of love and respect. He explained that to honour the dead with sincerity was part of maintaining harmony with the past. These experiences revealed to his disciples that virtue did not erase suffering but gave it meaning. By sharing his own pain openly, he showed them that strength included vulnerability. Confucius also reaffirmed the importance of ritual, especially in times of loss. Ritual, he said, allowed sorrow to be expressed in ways that connected individuals to family and community. It gave structure to emotions that might otherwise overwhelm. Through ritual, grief was transformed into reverence. His disciples came to see these practices not as burdens but as supports, guiding them through life's most difficult passages. Despite his advancing age, Confucius maintained a steady rhythm of teaching, reflection, and quiet living. He no longer sought office, for he understood that his influence would flow through his disciples rather than through political power. To them, he became more than a teacher. He was a living symbol of patience, resilience, and hope. And though his body grew frail, his voice remained strong, carrying the same steady conviction that had guided him since his youth, that harmony, born of virtue, was the true foundation of a good life. As the seasons turned and Confucius entered his final years, his household in Lu became a place of quiet learning. Disciples continued to visit, eager to absorb every word while they still could. The atmosphere was calm, filled with study, reflection, and the steady rhythm of their master's voice. Confucius no longer sought the attention of courts or rulers. His focus was entirely on preparing the next generation. He reminded his students that their duty was not to him personally, but to the truth of the teachings they carried. A teacher may pass away, he told them, but virtue does not die. It waits to be lived by those who believe in it. These words impressed upon them the weight of responsibility they bore. In his old age, Confucius often spoke of the importance of legacy. Yet he did not mean monuments or titles. Instead, he defined legacy as the transmission of wisdom. He explained that if his disciples lived as examples of harmony, then his mission would continue long after his death. He urged them to walk among the people, to listen with compassion, and to embody the principles of respect, sincerity, and benevolence in every act. This, he said, would be the greatest tribute they could offer him. His own life became the ultimate example of modesty. Though his name was beginning to be known more widely, he lived simply, eating plain meals and wearing humble robes. Visitors who expected grandeur often left surprised by his unpretentious manner. His disciples came to understand that true greatness required no display. It radiated quietly from character. They saw that his influence did not rest on wealth or power, but on the enduring force of example. Confucius also spent time reflecting on the limitations of his life. He admitted openly that he had not achieved the reforms he once hoped for, yet he found peace in knowing that he had remained faithful to his principles. He explained to his disciples that a noble life was not measured by accomplishments alone, but by integrity. To hold to the path of virtue, even when the world ignored it, was itself a form of success. These reflections gave his followers a deep sense of clarity. They realized that their master was teaching them how to face not only life, but also the approach of death with courage and calm. In these final lessons, Confucius revealed the fullness of his wisdom, that harmony was not a distant ideal, but a way of living and dying with dignity, sincerity, and hope. In his final years, Confucius became increasingly reflective about the meaning of harmony in a world that seemed perpetually divided. He often told his disciples that true harmony was not the absence of conflict, but the ability to live with balance and respect despite differences. He explained that just as music found beauty in the blend of distinct notes, society could find peace by honouring the roles and voices of many. This vision gave his disciples hope that even a fractured age might discover unity through virtue. In the evenings, Confucius would sometimes sit quietly with them, listening to the wind in the trees or the rhythm of footsteps in the courtyard. He used these simple sounds as metaphors, showing how nature itself offered lessons in balance. The cycles of the seasons, the rising and setting of the sun, the stillness after storms, all reminded them that order could return even after turmoil. These reflections carried comfort, offering a perspective larger than politics. Confucius also emphasized the importance of perseverance. He explained that harmony was not achieved in a moment, but through steady practice across years and generations. He urged his disciples never to abandon the path, even if the world mocked or ignored them. Virtue, he said, is like a flame. It may flicker in the wind, but if guarded with care, it will not go out. His words instilled resilience in his students, who came to see themselves as keepers of that flame. During this period, Confucius began organizing his thoughts into even shorter maxims, making them easier to remember. He encouraged his disciples to carry these sayings with them, repeating them like guiding stars when life grew confusing. These brief but profound statements, preserved with care, later became the heart of the Analects. His students knew that they were preserving not just words but the very essence of their master's wisdom. As his health declined, Confucius continued to teach with the same patience as before. He did not complain of weakness but accepted it as part of life's order. He reminded his disciples that even as the body aged, the spirit could remain vigorous. He urged them to continue studying and reflecting, telling them that the work of virtue never ended. To the very end, his presence radiated steadiness, giving his followers a living example of how to meet life's final stages with grace. For them, these last lessons carried special weight, for they revealed that harmony was not only a philosophy for youth and strength, but also a companion in age and mortality. As Confucius's health weakened, he spent more time reflecting on the long arc of his life. He spoke openly to his disciples about both his disappointments and his gratitude. He admitted that he had not seen rulers embrace his vision as he once hoped, yet he insisted that this did not mean his mission had failed. The worth of a life, he told them, is not measured by the power one holds, but by the truth one keeps. These words struck deeply, reminding his followers that integrity itself was a victory. He often sat quietly in his courtyard, observing the sky at dawn or the fading light at dusk. To him, the cycles of nature mirrored the cycles of human life: birth, growth, decline, and return. He encouraged his disciples to see death not as an end, but as part of this eternal rhythm. His calm acceptance gave them strength to face their own fears of mortality. In these moments, he was not only their teacher, but their companion in the universal journey of being human. During his final months, Confucius also emphasized gratitude. He thanked his disciples for their loyalty, telling them that their presence had been his greatest joy. A man without students, he said, is like a musician without an audience. My words live because you carry them. The disciples in turn expressed their devotion, promising to preserve and spread his teachings. These exchanges created a bond of mutual respect that transformed the sadness of parting into a sense of shared purpose. Confucius also left them with guidance on how to live after his passing. He urged them not to cling to grief, but to honour him by embodying the principles he had taught. He reminded them that harmony was not preserved through monuments but through actions: kindness to parents, justice in leadership, sincerity in speech, and humility in learning. By living these values, they would keep his spirit alive more powerfully than any shrine. In these final teachings, he gave them not only philosophy but also comfort, showing them that even death could be faced with dignity. His disciples, though sorrowful, felt reassured that their master's presence would endure through the path he had shown. As his days grew shorter, the household in Lu remained filled with quiet study, respectful rituals, and the calm presence of a teacher who had dedicated his life to harmony. For his followers, these last lessons became the most precious of all, revealing that the true mark of wisdom was not only how one lived, but also how one prepared to leave. In the last stages of his life, Confucius spent many hours speaking gently with his closest disciples, ensuring that his philosophy would remain clear in their minds. He no longer travelled or sought audiences with rulers, but his home became a quiet school where wisdom flowed like a steady stream. Visitors described the atmosphere as calm yet filled with purpose, as if every conversation carried the weight of eternity. Confucius often repeated the core of his teaching: cultivate virtue within, honour family, respect tradition, and act with sincerity in every matter. He told his disciples that if these principles guided their lives, harmony would naturally follow. His words, though familiar, seemed even more profound as time shortened. The disciples listened with deep attention, knowing these were among their master's final lessons. One of the themes he emphasized most was continuity. He explained that the wisdom of the ancients had been entrusted to him, and now it must be entrusted to them. I am but a link, he said, in a chain that stretches beyond sight. You are the next link, and others will follow you. These words impressed upon his followers both the humility and the responsibility of their role. They were not merely students, but carriers of a tradition that could shape civilizations. In private moments, Confucius sometimes expressed quiet regret over the losses he had endured. The death of his son, the rejection of his counsel by rulers, the endless wars that scarred the land. Yet he never allowed bitterness to take root. He told his disciples that sorrow was part of life's balance, teaching compassion through experience. Without grief, he said, we would never understand love. Without hardship, we would never value peace. His acceptance of suffering gave his followers a model of resilience, showing them that harmony did not mean the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning within it. As his health declined further, Confucius grew weaker in body but stronger in presence. His calm voice, his steady gaze, and his quiet dignity filled the household with peace. Even silence around him felt like teaching, for his life itself had become the embodiment of his philosophy. The disciples sensed that his influence would not end with his passing. It had already taken root in their hearts. In those final gatherings, they understood that they were not simply watching their teacher's life close, but witnessing the birth of a legacy that would outlast dynasties. As Confucius approached his final days, the rhythm of his household grew quieter but no less purposeful. His disciples gathered daily, eager to absorb even the faintest words, for they knew each moment was precious. Confucius, though frail in body, retained clarity of mind. He often reminded them that wisdom was not his possession, but a current flowing through time, and their task was to keep it alive. "Do not cling to me," he said softly, "cling to the path." These words were both a farewell and a command. He explained that the teachings belonged not to him as an individual, but to the order of heaven, entrusted to any who lived with virtue. His disciples felt the gravity of this responsibility and vowed to honour it with their lives. In these last gatherings, Confucius spoke more openly about mortality. He told his students that death was part of the same cycle that governed the seasons. Just as winter yielded to spring, so too would endings give way to beginnings. He urged them not to see death as defeat, but as transition. His calm acceptance transformed their fear into reverence, showing them that harmony could embrace even life's final mystery. During quiet evenings, he recalled memories of his youth, his hunger for knowledge, his service in Lu, his journeys through hostile lands, his moments of joy in teaching. He shared these not to boast, but to remind them that a life of virtue was built step by step, through perseverance in both hardship and peace. He He wanted them to see that greatness came not from extraordinary events, but from steady dedication to what was right. His disciples listened in silence, their hearts heavy yet inspired. They realized that his life itself had been the greatest lesson. As his strength faded, Confucius encouraged them to remain united. He warned them that division would weaken their mission, while unity would preserve it. "Stand together," he urged, "as branches of one tree, reaching different directions yet rooted in the same ground." These final instructions bound them with renewed loyalty to one another. When at last his voice grew too weak for long speech, his presence alone became a form of teaching. His calm eyes, his steady breath, his gentle composure, all revealed the harmony he had sought his entire life. And though sorrow filled the air, his disciples also felt peace, for they understood they were witnessing not an end but the flowering of a legacy destined to endure through centuries. In the final days of Confucius's life, his disciples gathered more closely than ever, filling the courtyard with a silence broken only by the sound of their master's voice when he chose to speak. His body had weakened, yet his mind remained luminous, steady as a flame that flickers but does not go out. He reminded them again that the teachings were never about himself but about the eternal order of heaven and the way of virtue that any person could follow. "My words are not mine alone," he whispered. "They belong to the path that connects all generations." This perspective gave his disciples comfort, for it shifted their grief into duty. They realized that though their teacher would soon depart, the responsibility to carry his wisdom rested firmly on their shoulders. During these last conversations, Confucius often returned to the idea of Ren, the humanity that had been the center of his philosophy. He told them that Ren was not grand or distant, but lived in the smallest acts. A gentle word to a child, respect for parents, honesty in trade, compassion for the weary. "If you cannot live Ren in the ordinary," he said, "you will never achieve it in the extraordinary." These words resonated deeply, for they revealed that his philosophy was never meant only for kings and ministers, but for every person in daily life. He also spoke about courage. Not the courage of battlefields, which he saw as fleeting, but the courage of moral conviction. True bravery, he explained, was holding to virtue even when standing alone. His disciples remembered how he himself had walked this path, rejected by rulers yet unwavering in principle. This memory became their example of enduring strength. Confucius further emphasized unity among them. He warned that after his passing, the world would test their loyalty to the teachings. Some would be tempted by wealth or titles, others by despair. "Do not scatter," he told them. "Remain as one family, disagree, but never divide." His disciples promised with tears that they would honor this plea. In his final nights, he asked to hear poetry and music, the arts he had cherished since youth. As the disciples sang ancient songs softly by lamplight, he listened with closed eyes, nodding faintly. To him, the harmony of music symbolized the harmony of life itself, many voices blending into one. Those who were present felt that moment sink into their hearts as an eternal memory. And when silence fell again, they knew that even as his breath grew shallow, his legacy had already become immortal, woven into their spirits like the enduring rhythm of the songs they sang. The final dawn of Confucius's life came quietly. His disciples gathered at his side, each holding a memory of years spent learning, wandering and growing under his guidance. The courtyard was still, the air heavy with both sorrow and reverence. Confucius, though weak, spoke with calm clarity, as if drawing from a well of strength that reached beyond the body. He reminded them once more that the essence of his teaching was harmony born of virtue, a balance of respect, sincerity, and benevolence. "If you live these principles," he told them, "my spirit will not be gone. It will walk with you in every act of goodness." These words became his final charge, transforming grief into responsibility. His disciples, choking back tears, promised to carry his teachings faithfully, knowing this moment would define the rest of their lives. In these last hours, Confucius did not speak of rulers or courts, but of humanity itself. He urged his students to remember that greatness was not measured by conquest or titles, but by the quiet strength of a heart aligned with virtue. He told them that if they could guide others towards sincerity, respect parents and elders, and act with kindness even when unrecognized, they would fulfill the true mission of a gentleman. This vision, humble yet profound, gave them hope that the path of harmony could outlast the chaos of their times. As the morning light grew, Confucius asked to hear one more piece of music. His disciples sang softly, their voices trembling, blending into the harmony he had always cherished. The melody carried both sorrow and peace, rising gently into the air. Confucius listened with closed eyes, a faint smile resting on his face. For him, the music was more than sound. It was the living symbol of unity, proof that his disciples had learned not only his words but the deeper spirit of his teaching. When silence fell again, his breathing slowed. Surrounded by those who loved him, he passed away with the same dignity that had marked his entire life, calm, steady, and resolute. The disciples wept openly, yet even in grief they remembered his counsel, to transform sorrow into reverence, and reverence into action. They prepared simple but sincere rituals, honouring him not with extravagance but with the depth of their devotion. And as they bowed in silence, they understood that though the man was gone, the teacher remained. His presence lingered in the bonds he'd created, in the harmony he had inspired, and in the path that stretched before them like a road lit by an eternal flame. After the passing of Confucius, the world of his disciples was filled with both grief and purpose. They mourned their teacher with deep sincerity, performing the rituals he taught them, not as empty gestures but as acts of love and respect. The ceremonies were simple, without grandeur, yet every bow, every offering carried profound meaning. In their hearts they felt the presence of their master, guiding them even in silence. For days the household remained still, the air heavy with reflection. Each disciple wrestled with sorrow, yet they remembered Confucius's words. That harmony was not the absence of pain, but the ability to give it meaning. They began to see their mourning as part of the continuity he had described, a way to transform loss into strength. In quiet conversations they recalled his sayings, each memory becoming a lamp against despair. Some spoke of his calm during hardship, others of his humility, and still others of his laughter in moments of ease. These recollections wove together into a portrait greater than any monument. They realized that their true inheritance was not only his words, but the living example of his character. Soon the disciples turned their energy toward preserving his teachings. They gathered the notes and fragments they had written over years of wandering. By combining them, they created a record of his wisdom, later known as the Analects. The work was not polished rhetoric, but genuine conversations, reflections of their teacher's voice as they had heard it. In this way, they ensured that future generations would encounter Confucius not as a distant figure, but as a living guide. Their task was not easy. Wars still raged, rulers still sought power, and virtue was often neglected. Yet the disciples held firm. They carried his teachings into their communities, serving as advisors, teachers, and role models. Some achieved positions in government, where they tried to shape policy with fairness. Others remained in villages, teaching families the values of respect and sincerity. Each, in his own way, kept the flame alive. Over time, their efforts began to bear fruit. The teachings of Confucius spread from one household to another, from one state to the next. What rulers once dismissed as impractical slowly gained recognition as essential for stability. The disciples came to see that their master had been right. Seeds of virtue required time, but once rooted they could not be uprooted. Through their loyalty, the wisdom of Confucius began its journey across centuries, destined to shape not only China but the wider world. The years after Confucius's death proved that his influence would not fade but grow, carried by the dedication of his disciples and the resonance of his ideas. They had wept for him as a father, yet soon their grief turned into resolve. They scattered across different states, each becoming a beacon of the teachings they had received. Their work ensured that the voice of their master would continue to echo, not through monuments of stone, but through living traditions of thought and action. In time, the Analects took shape, a collection of sayings and dialogues that captured the spirit of their teacher. These writings were simple in form yet profound in meaning, offering guidance for rulers, scholars, and ordinary people alike. Readers found in them not only philosophy but also warmth, as if they were still sitting at the feet of the sage himself. Through these pages, Confucius remained alive, his wisdom carried like a quiet stream flowing through history. Centuries passed, and dynasties rose and fell, yet the teachings endured. Emperors eventually recognized the power of his philosophy, adopting it as the foundation of governance. Schools across China taught his principles, and officials were measured not only by their knowledge but by their understanding of virtue. What had once been dismissed as impractical became the very fabric of society. The vision of Confucius, born in poverty and carried through hardship, had finally taken root in the heart of a civilization. His message extended beyond politics. Families adopted his emphasis on filial piety, strengthening bonds between generations. Communities embraced his respect for ritual, finding order and meaning in shared practices. Scholars across centuries debated his words, sometimes interpreting them differently, yet always returning to the central truth he had taught, that harmony arises when people act with sincerity, respect, and humanity. Even beyond China, his influence spread. Travelers, merchants, and thinkers carried his ideas to Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and eventually to the wider world. Across cultures, people found value in his call for balance and kindness. His wisdom crossed boundaries of language and time, proving that the pursuit of harmony was not limited to one land but part of the universal human condition. Today, when people speak of Confucius, they remember not a ruler or a conqueror but a teacher, a man who believed that greatness lay in the quiet strength of virtue. His legacy is not measured in battles won but in lives shaped, not in empires built, but in values preserved. Through centuries of change, his teachings remain steady, a reminder that harmony, though fragile, can endure when nurtured by humanity. And so, the life of Confucius closes not with silence, but with an echo carried through generations, guiding humanity toward the path of balance, respect, and peace.